What can we see? Is it recording now?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you for pointing it out. Thank you. For some reason, it was not recording, and that is a big problem. Let me check why not actually. Okay, we'll find out. So once again, we are currently developing coins which are satisfying compliant to one of the standards, ERC 27211155. And after that, a coin by itself serves almost no purpose. What we really need to do is to have a mechanism which would allow us to exchange those coins. So to exchange coins for coins and to exchange coins for real Ethereum. We're not going to exchange Ethereum for real USDT or USD. This is much better done by already existing financial exchanges, crypto exchanges. By the way, for your reference, I will give you a table of currently, I would say, considered to be serious and professional crypto exchanges. And we are going to implement a kind of crypto exchange by ourselves, with the difference that it is not going to be a centralized exchange. It is going to be a DEX, a decentralized exchange. So in the lecture today, we are discussing the differences between centralized exchanges and decentralized exchanges, and the basic principles of how a decentralized exchange would work and how we are going to implement our own DEX. So crypto exchanges and all those crypto exchanges are centralized, which I mentioned below. Whether centralized is spelled with S or Z depends whether you are British or American. S for British English, Z for American. I will spell it with S for the moment. So first of all, those crypto exchanges generally fall into two classes. One of them can be called, I will explain what it means, semi-regulated. And the other class is completely unregulated. As you see, there are no exchanges, crypto exchanges, which are completely regulated, fully regulated. There are none. In general, as you can see, for example, for currencies, for FX, there is a fully regulated exchange, which is the Moscow exchange, and Moscow exchange trades contracts such as USD ruble. So, for example, it is the rate settler, so the major exchange which trades at that exchange actually set the rate, the exchange rate of USD ruble, 75 something as of today, for example. It is fixed as a result of trades at the Moscow exchange. And the Moscow exchange is fully regulated. It is being monitored and supervised and regulated by the Russian Central Bank. American exchanges, for example, uh, the exchanges where American equities are traded, such as NYSE, NASDAQ, BATS, and so on, are fully regulated by the United States Security and Exchange Commission, SEC, if you remember, SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission. But cryptocurrencies, and apart from that, there are quasi exchanges, quite a few of them actually, primarily for FX, for currencies. FX is forex, so foreign exchange currency trading, which look like exchanges, but legally they are not as heavily regulated as, for example, the Moscow Exchange or Nasdaq or NYSE or BATS, which I mentioned. These are called ECNs, electronic communication networks. So, for example, for currency trading, ECNs are like um, uh, EBS, which is the number one currency exchange, semi-exchange actually, because it is not fully regulated. Reuters matching, Coronex, and so on. Uh, they do not have a legal status of full exchanges, but they operate very much like exchanges. So in fact, what we call crypto exchanges, it is important to understand, is that actually they are ECNs, electronic communication networks. What does it mean? ECN is a term which is good to remember, which means that technically look like exchanges. What does it mean? It means that they operate order books for orders. Uh, they operate matching engines and so on. That's technically. Legally, ECNs are not exchanges. I would say not fully regulated exchanges. Because they are not fully regulated, they are semi-regulated or completely unregulated. So semi-regulated exchanges are those which are at least partially regulated, not by SEC, but by the US Commodity Futures Trading Commission. CFTC. In the United States, crypto assets are considered to be, in general, they are considered to be commodities. Uh, Actually, well, what does it mean considered to be commodities? In the last lecture, we discussed that crypto tokens can be viewed as either equity or utility tokens. So equity tokens, as we have seen, are equities from the legal point of view. And equities are very heavily regulated by not CFTC, but by SEC, Security Exchange Commission in the US. So there are two regulating bodies in the United States, SEC and CFTC. SEC is for equities, non-equity tokens, as we know, utility, either considered to be commodities. Actually, it is interesting to note that from the financial standpoint, commodities and FX are very close, commodities and currencies are very close to each other. And that's why in investment banks, commodities and currencies are very often and typically operated by the same trading division, currencies and commodities. So there is no surprise for this reason that, for example, uh, currencies and cryptocurrencies such as BTC are, from a legal point of view, if regulated, considered to be commodities. Regulated by CFTC or completely unregulated. And for that reason, you see that it is a nightmare for a coin issuer is for if for whatever reason the coin is classified to be equity, an equity. And that's precisely what happened with Ton and what happened with Libra. For both reasons, classifying the corresponding tokens as equities killed the project. Because if it is recognized to be an equity, then you automatically become subject of SEC regulations. The regulations are very heavy. The regulations are, I would say, very much contrary to the spirit and nature of crypto trading, and that would kill and had killed the whole idea. So if you design your cryptocurrency, then your first concern is to make sure that you really can prove that it is not an equity, which means that distribution of this token does not give the owners of the token equity type rights, like for example, shared ownership with an enterprise, the right to receive dividends, the right to vote, possibly, and so on. So you really need to convince SEC that it is not an equity. Both actually Facebook and Telegram failed to convince SEC that the corresponding tokens were not equities. And that's why they could not sustain the regulations which were coming upon them, and the projects were terminated. But for example, for BTC or Ethereum, it is quite clear that they are not equities because there is no enterprise, single enterprise, which stands behind them, and therefore distribution of those tokens uh, cannot, in general, give you ownership in any kind of enterprise, and therefore it is clearly not equities. If they are not equity, they either remain completely unregulated or trading those tokens is considered to be commodity trading, very much like, for example, oil and gas futures, and regulated by CFTC. So, what are those exchanges, crypto exchanges, semi-regulated by the United States CFTC? or related or similar European bodies. European Union. So first of all, Kraken, Gemini, Coinbase X, for example, Coinbase Pro, um, in the European Union, Bitstamp, what else? Apart from Kraken, Gemini, Coinbase, Polonix at least used to be. These are, let's say, more or less regulated United States or European regulated exchanges. What does it mean? So what are characteristic features of this? So first of all, it is not possible just to register yourself into this exchange, just without providing any documents. In order to do that, you really need to provide full documentation about yourself. So a registration requires, let's say, ID, and normally it is also residential address verification. Even so, normally it might sometimes be different, but normally those for US and European Union citizens only, and mostly for US. So if it is not a European Union exchange like Bitstamp, then registering for this exchange is primarily for for US citizens. It is extremely difficult to, for example, get registered with Kraken or Coinbase X, Coinbase Pro, for example. Uh, Apart from Pro, there are other divisions of Coinbase. If you are not a US citizen. So primarily, these are services for the US citizens. But what is good is that those exchanges, after this is, by the way, known as KYC, know your customer. So those regulated exchanges, they need to provide full KYC authentication in order to allow you to trade on those exchanges. What else? In addition, as a reward for this know your customer, what you can do, you can trade, typically can trade crypto, fiat are just classical currencies, crypto fiat pairs. For example, BTC USD. If you trade really BTC USD, not USDT, which is the crypto equivalent of USD, but BTC USD, then obviously those exchanges need to partner with banks with classical banks to process fiat transactions. And yes, for example, Coinbase and Kraken use Barclays Bank. So Barclays Bank entered a partnership with those regulated exchanges, and Barclays Bank allows those exchanges to, first of all, hold customer accounts associated with real currencies, and then make transactions when a customer, for example, puts USD on the account, or when the customer, for example, traded BTC for USD, then the resulting USDs are released into the corresponding account, and eventually the client gets paid in USD. By the way, this is a very, very, very non-trivial process. Um, Looks like obvious, but it is not at all obvious. If, for example, you develop your own crypto exchange, I have been working for La Token crypto exchange, which is legally situated in Singapore and Estonia, but the whole development team is in Moscow. So, in fact, it is Russian. Then it is a very big problem for such a newcomer, for a non-American, non-European Union exchange, of how to process fiat payments in USD or Euro. Because what happens is that most banks refuse to work with such an exchange. If they detect that you opened an account, a bank account, actually to settle crypto transactions. So, for example, you opened it for uh, just general business purposes, but then people start putting funds into this account, and also from this account or a number of accounts, you start paying a large number of different people, uh, and the bank suspects that your account is actually for processing crypto payments for crypto related activities. Euro or USD payments are related to crypto activities. Then it is almost certainly that uh, your account will be suspended, the funds will be confiscated, and your exchange becomes bankrupt. So for La Token, um, it was not possible, in spite of the best effort we made. We could not find a way of how we could settle the crypto to USD transactions. So it is perfectly easy to receive on our electronic wallets or electronic addresses BTC or Ethereum transactions, but it is absolutely unclear how to receive or pay USD transactions. So the maximum which was possible to do, uh, and also with limited volumes, was settling crypto to euro transactions and then getting connected through an Estonian bank, getting connected to SEPA, which is Single European Payment Architecture, and then sending via SEPA, sending transactions in euro to European bank clients, which is not at all, even that was not at all trivial, and getting USD based transactions settled appeared to be completely impossible. So we couldn't do that. uh, for regulated, because Latochen was entirely unregulated. For regulated exchanges, it is somehow possible. So, for example, yes, Coinbase and Kraken, they partnered with Barclays Bank, and uh, using Barclays Bank facilities, they could settle both actually USD and Euro transactions. Now we are in column number 2, which is unregulated exchanges. Most important unregulated exchanges are the following. So who is an informal leader at the moment? The leaders are Binance, and Binance is the only one which can also settle crypto to fiat transactions. I can't tell you, I don't know which bank they are using, but they can. And in order to do that, at least for any non-trivial quantities, KYC is also required, obviously. Binance, what are others? OKEX. OKEX used to be a completely untrusted exchange for quite a while. In the past, there are reports, many reports that, for example, liquidity, which you could see at OKEX, was completely, to a large extent, for 90% was fake. You see an order at a good price, you send an aggressive order in order to trade with them, you hope that it will be filled, it is not filled. So the liquidity you could see at OKEX used to be just an imaginary fake liquidity posted to the exchange in order to promote the exchange, because in many cases those unregulated exchanges, they do have venture capitalists who fund them, and those venture capitalists eventually, well, not eventually, but first thing they would see is the higher ranking of the exchange in, for example, in league tables, which uh, sort the exchanges with respect to the daily volume. Even if the exchange is not making money yet, it is still a very good thing to see very, very high rankings in terms of volumes. And that's why what the exchanges do in this case, they uh, simply forge the statistics by providing non-existing liquidity, by providing even sometimes fake trades, because what happens is that they have their own participants or market makers which do trading with each other. And for that reason, OKEX was considered to be, of those large exchanges, nearly a number one fake exchange. Very important, not anymore. Over the past 2 years, OKEX matured into a real exchange which can largely be trusted and is considered to be as serious as Binance. Uh, all those exchanges, they do from time to time have fake liquidity problems. They are not as transparent as semi-regulated exchanges, but nevertheless, they are considered to be, I mean, those which I put in this list are considered to be good enough. If you see liquidity at those exchanges and you send an order to buy BTC at those exchanges, then the probability of a fill, the fill rate, is sufficiently large nowadays, so you consider this liquidity to be real and trusted and serious. So that's how. So that's about OKEX. Don't uh, don't stigmatize it as it used to be. It is a more or less good exchange nowadays. What else? Bitfinex. I would put in this list BitMEX with E. There is also BitMEX with A, which might also be a good one, but the liquidity is lower and it is not as popular as BitMEX with E. Actually, BitMEX is for futures only, so it doesn't trade spot. Although for crypto trading, whether it is futures or spot, it does not make any big difference for you. I will provide some details actually about what are the difference between futures and spot. It is more about how the trades are settled. Um, Hobby, I would put on this list. Maybe some others, for example, FTX. Um, Maybe something else, but for the moment, let's say Binance, OKEX, Bitfinex, BitMEX, Hobby, FTX. So we have a number of regulated and completely unregulated, but still reliable, I would say. But still reliable crypto exchanges. Again, even those which are semi-regulated are in fact not exchanges, but ECNs, electronic communication networks. Although, obviously, those which are completely unregulated are also ECNs. Because exchange, when we call it the exchange, it is something about very, very, very heavily regulated legal status. So what can we say about those unregulated ones? Typically, KYC still required, but less stringent. So for example, for getting registered with Binance or BitMEX, I don't remember whether the proof of residential address was required, or even if required, it is not very heavily checked. Still, your passport is required. Very funny is that if those regulated exchanges on the left are normally for US and European Union citizens, then here the situation is other way around. Normally, US citizens, why not US citizens, are we? Are not accepted. If your only passport is a United States passport, you are typically not accepted to trade at Binance or BitMEX. Why not? Because in this case, the exchange would have some legal obligation about reporting to the US authorities of your trades, profits, so that the Internal Revenue Service, IRS of the United States, would charge taxes from you. And it is very difficult for those unregulated exchanges. Most of them are legally registered in jurisdictions like Hong Kong, Singapore, in Japan, for example. Uh, then dealing with the United States Internal Revenue Service is a big, big problem for them. They simply do not want uh, all that headache, especially because if it happened that they underreported or incorrectly reported something, they could face, unfortunately, very significant sanctions from the United States authorities. Those sanctions, blacklists, are very common nowadays, and it is very, very easy to get blacklisted by the US Department of Commerce, the US Treasury, by any other American government bodies. So simply not to get any risk related to that, the exchanges now do not want American citizens on board, and the American citizens would not be allowed. Um, apart from Binance, those unregulated exchanges typically do not accept fiat currencies, which means that most of them would trade most of them would trade, say, BTC to USDT or BTC to USDC. If you remember from the last lecture that USDT and USDC are two largest volume so-called stable coins. That's a term, stable coins, which are supposed to have fixed exchange rate, or at least low volatility exchange rate uh, on top of USD. So crypto dollars do exist, and they're primarily USDT, Tether. I discussed last time in detail how Tether operates, so it gets eventually some amount of USDs, claims that puts those USDs on a bank account of Tether, where they would sit and will completely be out of circulation. So those USDs are unmoved anymore. And for the amount of USDs received in the lots of 150,000, Tether issues the corresponding number of USDTs. Then auditors come and they try to calculate the total amount of USD assets uh, as received by Tether, whether they are equal to the corresponding amount of USDTs. Several times this auditing was done, and the result was the amount of USDTs is almost equal to the amount of USDs, well, total amount of assets, including USD's bank account. So in fact, first of all, this auditing was not done completely up to the standards, because the auditing bodies still lacked some licenses required for that. They could be auditors, but not for financial institutions, for example. And secondly, it is not just the total value of Tether USD bank accounts, which was compared with the total amount of USDTs, but some other assets which are considered by those auditors to be liquid enough. So we can say that ideally, total USDT volume should be around, it should be equal to the total Tether USD assets, not just total USD assets, but total USD assets set aside, which are out of circulation. You receive USD lots, in the lots of 150k USD, you set them aside, you put them on a special bank account, they are untouched and unmoved anymore, they are backing your USDT, they are backing your USDT cryptocurrency, and the corresponding amount of USDT is issued. In reality, that's ideally, all right? Ideally, what happens? In reality, total USDT volume or size is greater than total Tether USD set aside assets. So USDTs in circulation are not completely backed by set aside USD assets of Tether. Does it mean that USDT is unreliable? I would say, and it was pioneered by, I would say, first inventors of paper money in Europe. There was a Scottish adventurist acting in France. In the 18th century, John Law first he founded the first bank issuing paper money, and that was in around 1718, if I remember correctly. What also helped John Law very much in that, in France, yes. So paper money, very much like USDTs, were issued in exchange for real assets. What are real assets? Real assets, at that time, real assets were gold or silver money. So basically what he was doing, he was receiving gold or silver and issuing banknotes backed by those precious metal deposits. What he did eventually, you can imagine what he did. He issued again paper money banknotes volume was greater by a large factor than the denomination of precious metal deposit. And you know what? It was considered by, it was the invention of John Law when he realized, and he was the first person to realize this, and that was 3 centuries ago, that such a situation when the amount of your paper money, or now we would say the amount of USDT, being significantly greater, or at least greater than the total amount of deposits backing your paper money or your cryptocurrency. That such a situation is normal. It is not a fraud. It is not something illegal. It is completely normal and useful for the economy in general. Uh, because the probability that all paper money or USDT, for the sake of the argument, holders would immediately claim the corresponding precious metal or at once or USD is very, 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 very low. Whereas issuing large amounts of paper money or USDT into the economy would be good from the general economic standpoint of monetary circulation, would revive trades. Nowadays, we would say would stimulate crypto trading, would stimulate economic transactions. So, in general, it is quite okay. So, don't say that if, for example, eventually Tether created more USDTs than the amount of USD set aside assets, that it is something bad, a kind of fraud. No, it is not a fraud. Issuing the total amount of high liquidity crypto assets, or let's say paper money, as John Law did, uh, compared to the amount of your backing, is generally okay. It is okay as long as, no, obviously there are some limits. It is okay as long as the ratio of your virtual assets. What are virtual assets? In case of John Law, virtual assets were paper money. In case of crypto assets, virtual assets are precisely, in our example under consideration, USDT. Over real assets is limited. What does it mean, limited? I really don't know. So, for example, if you create USDTs at probably twice as large volume as the amount of USDs you have received, this is probably okay. If you created 10 times more USDTs at the amount of USDs you received, it's probably still okay. But if you create USDTs at the amount of, let's say, 1,000 times compared to USDs, this is probably not okay and results in inflation of your USDTs. So limited, I don't know by how much limited, by a factor of 10 something. 10 something comes from risk management standards in the modern financial industry. So, for example, Barclays Bank and all investment banks, they have the total amount of, I would say, risk, and by risk also we also mean various virtual securities underwritten by a bank compared to liquid assets such as USD, uh, maybe treasury notes, liquid stocks or shares, and so on. Barclays Bank, which I mentioned, in the middle of financial crisis in 2008, it had the amount of risky, virtual risky assets, virtual risky instruments over non-risky, primarily USD or Euro assets. So this ratio was 60 for them. And nevertheless, the bank managed to navigate its way quite successfully in the middle of the crisis, and nothing wrong happened to it. Although for other banks, it did happen. Uh, Lehman Brothers had a ratio of, which I mentioned, of 40 something, and 40 something appeared to be fatal for them. So the bank went into liquidation. Uh, so I would say 1 plus epsilon to 40 something, to 10 something is probably okay, as long as. And the second condition is there is no market panic. And that's a very difficult to satisfy. So basically, investors have a trust, and the trust is the key word here. Is have a trust in your assets. For the moment, crypto investors do have a trust in USDT. Moreover, USDT is traded at a slight premium normally compared to USD. So USDT to USD exchange rate, which is supposed to be normally equal to 1, it is slightly greater than 1. At some points it was lower than 1, but over the past few years it is normally slightly greater than 1, which means that people find USDT much more even useful than USD. Yes, you can freely, if you want, you can freely convert your USDT to USD, but it doesn't happen that all USDT traders convert their USDTs into USD at once, and therefore, with the ratio of USDT volume to USD volume being limited, okay, it is not exactly equal to 1, but it is not 1000 either. So it is probably, I don't know, maybe 2, maybe 3, maybe under 10, something like that. It is not so large that it happened that people try to convert USDTs into USD and do it at once, and Tether is not able to satisfy this demand. So Tether so far, eventually when it comes to a large lot of USDs to be converted to USDT, Tether could do it all the time. So which means that it is okay from the trust point of view, and USDT is much more useful than USD from transactional standpoint, because why Tether is more useful? Because if you send funds from, for example, from Europe to the United States, or from Russia to the United States, USD, let's say Russia or European Union to US bank transaction, because a US bank is involved, then the standards, I mean the mechanisms and the standards of how you do it um, is largely determined by the US payment architecture. And the US payment architecture is, I would say, much more dated, I could even say backward, compared to a Russian or European Union payment systems. We have these fast payment systems in Russia. We have European Union SEPA, but US transactions are still slow and costly in general. So do you have any idea if you send a transaction from, for example, Russia or European Union to US bank in USD, how long it takes and what are the costs? Or I would say, first of all, long. Long means 1-2 business days. BD is a business day. If you send a transaction today, it will not arrive in the US bank today. It will arrive in the best case tomorrow if done before the cutoff time. And cutoff time for most of European and Russian banks is something in Europe it is before I think 11 a.m. Mid-European time. In Russia, because of a time difference, it could be before, for example, I don't know, 1 p.m. or 2 p.m. No later. Russian time, Moscow time. But if you send it before this cutoff, then in the end the transaction will be received the next business day. Next business day means if it is on Friday, then the next business day is Monday. If you send it after the cutoff time, so depending on the cutoff time, okay, on transaction usually abbreviated by TX time, transaction time relative to cutoff time, so 1-2 business days, definitely not minutes or seconds. And this transaction is called a wire transfer. So when you say money would be wired or money would be sent by a wire transfer, this means a dollar transfer from abroad or to abroad from the United States. And prepare for no good in this case, because there is a minimum surcharge for a wire transfer. A fee. And you know how big is it? A fee for USD wire transfer is big. It is $30. Plus banks may do more. So 1 or 2 business days and a minimum fee of $30. That's what you do in USD. If using USDT, USDT is implemented nowadays on top of 2 networks, as I mentioned. One of them is originally Omni, which is a clone of Bitcoin, if I remember correctly. And now USDT is available over Ethereum as well. USDC is another one. That's Ethereum. There are other USD stable crypto coins. There is a USDT and there is a less popular other way around, TUSD. Don't confuse them. USDT is from Tether. TUSD, I don't remember. And others. So all those transactions, we now having started the foundations of distributed ledger systems, we know what is the transaction time, for example, over a BTC like or Ethereum like network. We would say that in general, the transaction time, strangely enough, the transaction time is infinite. It's not one or two business days. Theoretically infinite. What does it mean? It means that whatever transactions has occurred, it is never final. As you know from the proof of work and forking uh, properties of blockchain, that in general, any transaction can potentially be reversed. But the probability of reversing a transaction which was confirmed, let's say at least 3 times, is absolutely negligible. Has been confirmed n times mean that your transaction, so there was a prior block, so that's a blockchain, okay? Then your transaction is in this block. This block was hashed by the miners. Hashed by miners. Oh, yes. And then there are further blocks on top of that. Say at least 2. So your transaction is here. Then, so that's in a block n. So that's n minus 1. Now there is n plus 1 and possibly n plus 2. So there is a chain which started at your block where your transaction was hashed. So in the vast majority of transactions, given that, you remember why, given that the average hashing time, for example, over Bitcoin blockchain, the average hashing time which is required to successfully hash a block is 10 minutes. And the time required by the blockchain, Bitcoin blockchain, is to propagate a hashed block is over all other nodes. It is a matter of seconds, maybe up to a minute, but let's say it is even less than that. Then even a single collision is quite unlikely. So the probability that someone in parallel with the miners which hashed your transaction into a block, that they hashed another block and then a fork occurs, so from this prior block, maybe there is another one. The probability of that is very low because normally if there is another miner and you are trying to hash a block and then your block appears, they would immediately stop the effort, no point. It needs to be a very accurate and near coincidence that your block and other blocks and another block were hashed at the same time and none of them could see each other because they were at the time of being propagated through the network. And then a fork occurs. So the probability even of a single fork is very small. Moreover, if such a small fork uh, uh, occurs, then most likely another block competing with this one would contain your transaction as well. And if your transaction was in a block N, and then this block N was generally accepted by the blockchain and then used as a source for n plus 1 and for n plus 2, then it is extremely improbable that there is an alternative fork somewhere, and that it could, for whatever reason, be reversed. Absolutely, absolutely improbable. Therefore, 3 times hashing time is considered to be a confirmation time. Therefore, let's say for USDT over Omni, we're talking about 30 minutes for 3 confirmations. And although theoretically any transaction can be reversed, but it is absolutely improbable with a probability less than, let's say, 10 to minus 100, you can calculate it, that it would be reversed if 3 successful uh, blocks were signed, including the nth block which contains your transaction. Therefore, we can say that the transaction time over of USDT over the network is about 30 minutes. For Ethereum, it is sometimes longer than that. In practice, it could be maybe up to 1 hour for Ethereum transactions, but in any case, we're talking about half an hour, maybe 1 hour transaction time with completely negligible transaction cost. The transaction cost for Bitcoin is determined actually not by monetary value, but by your size in bytes. The transaction cost for Ethereum may require a little bit further gas, which is involved, but in any case, the transaction cost is, uh, I would say, of the order of, um, let's say, 1 basis point, 10 to minus 4, relative to your transaction value, or smaller, which is definitely not a $30 surcharge. If you need to send $100 to someone and you still get in the regular transaction by wire transfer a $30 transaction. What does it mean? It means that USDT has a great economic value, even if USDT or USDC have been issued in larger numbers than the corresponding dollar deposits. People would not normally, unless a panic occurs, would not rush to exchange all USDTs and USDCs for real dollars, because having USDTs in circulation is a very good idea. You can, for example, pay for goods or services. A company in Russia can hire American developers or other way around and pay them in cryptocurrency and not bother with lengthy, costly cross-border wire transfers. That's the reason why cryptocurrencies are so important and become more important for the economy. So you can really trust most liquid of them. Uh, that's why, going back, that's why Tether and USDC are okay and they are trusted, and it is completely okay to conduct financial trading of other cryptocurrencies backed by USDT and USDC. Eventually, however, one way or another, you will need to convert your cryptocurrencies into real currencies. A software developer who got paid in USDT eventually needs to buy real groceries to sustain his life in USD rubles. And that's why they would need to convert cryptocurrencies into fiat somehow. And if they're in the United States, they could do it via Kraken or Bitstamp or whatever. If they're outside, then currently the best way of performing fiat trades is via is via Binance. So that's the only more or less reliable and feasible way of how this can be done outside of the United States or European Union. Now, having considered all those exchanges, we must say that nevertheless, there is a very, very, very big drawback of all those centralized exchanges. However we like them, there is a very big problem with them. By the way, just stepping back, just one step back, just to complete the story, I was comparing the modern cryptocurrencies with the first paper money printed by John Law, and we can even make more parallels with this. First of all, not only he founded the first bank, but he then added little bit more, much more credibility to his bank, because he also mobilized what we now call the administrative resource behind this. He became finance minister of France himself. And obviously, you know that if this is backed by the finance ministry, then the trust in his bank significantly increased and eventually collapsed by inflation, simply because this ratio of virtual assets to real assets became too large. So that first story was not a complete success. A good idea, inception, acceptance, mobilization of administrative resource. The idea grew out of proportion, and then inflation, as the risk to assets ratio became too large, resulted in the collapse of the whole scheme. Hopefully this will not happen with USDT or USDC. Returning to our story of financial exchanges, what are the major drawbacks of centralized exchanges? And the major drawback, I would put it that way, that when a trade at the exchange occurs, trade is not really a trade. I will explain what it means. Trade is an indication of a trade. You may wonder why, how is it possible? Tomorrow I will explain these mechanics in a little bit more detail for those who do not know them yet. But in general you do, because in your last year many of you, or most of you, have probably had, now I have only one student who is attending this lecture live, so I could ask you, have you had data mining last year in your third year in the spring of 2020?
No, it was a data science course, so
No data mining for you, okay. Those who had, because we used examples of exchange-based trading to learn data mining. This is a very, very, very good, I would say, set of examples. So I will need to
But
repeat more.
actually, none of us had this course. We are like from the same track. And
Okay. Okay, good point. Then I will repeat the basics. But basically, what happens is that for a trade to happen, market participants they send orders to the exchange. In detail, we will discuss this tomorrow. And they send orders to the exchange. So, for example, one of them is sends a buy order, another one a sell order, and then when those orders come into the exchange, then they may or may not, depending on the prices specified in those orders, they may or may not match. And therefore, the internal operations of the exchange, we'll discuss them in more detail tomorrow. It is a so-called matching engine. So the exchange contains a matching engine, which is an automated matching engine, sorry, an automated device, a software solution, which for incoming orders decides what to do with them. If there is a match, then a match precisely results in a kind of trade. Why I say in a kind of? Because that's entirely an artifact which is living inside the matching engine. The matching engine decides that this buy order and this sell order matches, and therefore there would be a trade between the market participants. But at this moment, when a match occurs, there is absolutely no real funds transfer between a buyer and seller, which would happen. It is just a paper trade, and that's why I say it is an indication of a trade, which would indicate that the corresponding amount of, let's say, BTCs are to be transferred from, let's say, BTC seller to the BTC buyer in exchange for the corresponding amount of dollars, which is amount of BTCs times the price at which the match occurred, to be sent in the opposite direction. At this very moment, it is only an indication of, what is an indication? Indication of future fund transfers. Not immediately. As we say, to have it in other words, trade matching, I would say matching orders and settling trades. Settling really mean that funds are transferred, and settling trades occur at different times. How much different? They could differ from minutes to hours. Normally, it is still happening uh, within a relatively short time. In fiat exchanges, this could be up to the end of the trading day or later. So in fiat exchanges, it could be, let's say, after the exchange closes at 7 p.m. today, or it could be tomorrow, or there is a very common situation when the trades are settled even at T plus 2, T plus today plus 2 business days. So delay settling after matching. For fiat exchanges, this delay is from hours to, let's say, 2 business days. For centralized crypto exchanges, typically less. I would say typically minutes, which is probably acceptable, but it still exists. And the most important thing is even not that. The fact that trade is not a trade but an indication, and in order to get your funds after a matching, it needs to be settled. It still means that it is conceptually a true, it is still conceptually a two-phase process. So the question is, could it be, for example, that a trade was indicated, so a match has occurred, and then a crash has occurred at the exchange, as a result of which your trade would be lost before the funds are really transferred? Could it be? Yes, of course, it is theoretically possible. Obviously, the implementers of those matching engines, they do take, if it is a good exchange, the necessary precautions. They implement some kind of persistence. They use technologies for persistent messaging. I can tell you that for one of such matching engines, which I myself participate in the development of, at the token exchange, we used Kafka reliable messaging in order to make sure that all trades which occurred are somehow persistently recorded and would not be lost. But now, nevertheless, conceptually, trades are distinct from settling, and this is something which is completely normal for classical fiat exchanges, but we can do better uh, in the crypto world. And there is a much more serious problem. In order to, that's a very important, in order to settle trades, so to really get funds transferred, trades on centralized centralized exchanges, clients need to deposit funds first to exchange wallets. This is a very, 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 very big problem and very big limitations. That's completely contrary to crypto cryptocurrency philosophy, to crypto philosophy, I would say. You lose control over your funds at that point. What does it mean? As long as your funds were under your wallet, you have been in the possession of the private keys, which allow you, and that's the only mechanism which can allow someone to make further transactions with your funds. As you remember, ownership of crypto funds is equivalent to ownership of the private keys, which allow you to make subsequent transactions uh, for those balances. Uh, Either these are private keys associated with the public keys to which the corresponding BTC transaction was made, in the blockchain of Bitcoin, or these are private keys associated with of your Ethereum account, because in Ethereum there are proper accounts rather than unspent transactions. But in any case, you had your private keys. But once funds sent to an exchange, you do not possess the corresponding private keys. The private keys of the exchange account belong to the exchange. So that's all. As long as your funds are deposited at the exchange, they are not yours. You are at the mercy of the exchange. If the exchange decides to steal your funds, it is completely free to do that. For regulated exchange, it is semi-regulated, it is quite unlikely. For a reputable unregulated, it is quite unlikely either, but it does happen. And there are so many, as you know, the story, um, many stories of attacks on exchange wallets. So much funds have been stolen, not as a result of weaknesses in exchanges themselves, but most likely due to failures in storing the keys securely. So all these episodes, exchange has been hacked. And you can't do anything about this because the keys belong to the exchange. This is a critical point why actually using centralized exchanges might not be a very good idea, or at least you can do it transiently, uh, having converted your cryptocurrency into another currency and then send it to a wallet over which you have full control. You have the corresponding private keys, because now it is your complete responsibility about how to store the keys. All right, but in general, that's what you don't want. And what you would rather do is to implement an exchange which would not suffer from those limitations and which would be all the time safe as long as you keep the corresponding private keys. And this is indeed what you want to do. And the solution is DEX, distributed exchanges. So what DEX is, how to build DEX, I provided sufficient motivation today. So how to build the DEX, and we are going to build the DEX, we are going to discuss tomorrow. For now, we are done. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.